So, hello everyone and welcome to the Cumbria LEP Construction Sector Panel webinar. For those that don't know, the Construction Sector Panel is one of a number of panels as part of the LEP, and we have really three main purposes. One is to provide a voice to the construction sector within Cumbria. One is to receive information from government and from LEP and a bit of news around what's happening in the construction sector. And the third is that we have our own actions and priorities, and we work on various different things. This year we've split it into four focused priorities. One is skills, one is collaboration, one is engaging better with statutory authorities, and one is sustainability. And today's webinar is focused on the collaboration element of those four. I think our industry faces a lot of challenges. We're not very diverse. We've got challenges around innovation, massive challenges around sustainability and the climate change. And I think for me, one of the reasons I'm particularly excited about this webinar today is that I think the key to getting better at all of those is collaboration and collaborating well and actually working together with clients and designers and subcontractors to focus on the real value and the real purpose of a project. I think collaboration is something we talk about a lot in the industry, and we don't always get it right. And I think it's not something new. It's been called different things in the past. You know, the NEC coming in was trying to address the same issues that things like the Construction Playbook are trying to address. I think the issue is that we have to have behavioural change as well as structural change. And I think often the way that we approach projects in our industry doesn't encourage collaborative behaviours. And often smaller contractors or contractors at all are accused of maybe not caring about environmental issues or social impact or diversity. And I think that's really unfair. I think when you're working as a subcontractor particularly, and you've got tight margins and program driven and all risk pushed onto contractors, it's not that you don't care, it's that there's not the headspace and there's not the time and there's not the ability to take risks and try new things and to try to learn and do things differently. And so I think when we hear some of the speakers today, I think it's really exciting to think about what could we achieve if we could do better. I think there's a huge amount of skills and knowledge and great values in our industry, and lots of people who are frustrated by sometimes the value that's left on the table. And so for me, collaboration is the key to unlocking all of the challenges that we face in our industry and all of the things that I really care about. I think we fix them through this working together properly. And it's really important for that to start with clients and for it to start with procurement, and the contracts and the way that we procure work is where it starts. And then it's down to all of us to get the behaviours right to match that different approach to procurement. So we've got some really good speakers today. Initially, the speakers were just going to join our usual construction sector panel, but they were so good that I felt like that was a wasted opportunity. And so we wanted to open it up to allow much more people to come and hear the speakers. So that's why this particular construction sector is a webinar rather than the usual panel meeting. So we're going to be here from Peter McDermott, who is from University of Manchester. I've heard Peter speaking at events before, and he's extremely knowledgeable, talks a lot about Value Toolkit and Construction Playbook. I'm getting sector thrown in there, Peter, apologies. Then James is going to talk to us from Salford about Project 13 and PPP. And then finally, we're going to hear from James Daplan from Cumbria County Council to really kind of take us through what does it mean for Cumbria. And I think there's a lot of us on the call or on the webinar that have been involved in the County Council framework and so well aware of how much they care about collaboration, but it's what next and how do we continue to build on some good behaviours that we already have. And I think the final thing I just wanted to say was that often people kind of accuse Cumbria of maybe being old-fashioned or not up to date and maybe somehow behind when it comes to collaboration. And I think that is nonsense. I think we're ahead in a lot of ways on collaboration because we have a small pool of clients and a small pool of other contractors. It means we have to behave in a long-term way. You know, if we kind of try and behave in a short-term contractual way, all that'll happen is we don't have very many clients for very long, and people will remember. And probably a lot of the contractors on the call will agree that often your client contact in an organisation are there for a long time and have a long memory. So it forces us to behave in often a more long-term and more collaborative way than perhaps bigger cities where you've got other clients and you can maybe behave in a slightly more short-term way. So I completely reject the idea that Cumbria are behind on this. I think we're ahead. I think we just need to build on what we're already good at and really see the opportunities ahead of us. And so I'm excited for all that this means for both our industry and our region. So yeah, over to Peter for the first speaker of the day. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Emma. Just 1 second. Let's get back to the beginning there. Thank you, Emma. Great introduction. Peter McDermott from the University of Salford. Emma made some good points there, I think. Quite often my role is, as working in a university, has been to translate some of those high-level policy goals and the new policy that's coming out from government into the region. And just to recognise the very important point that Emma made there, which is national policy will play out different in the regions. That's why we've got devolved governments and so on. And so it's to some of those things that I will be speaking today. I've been asked to speak particularly about the Construction Playbook and Value Toolkit. And what I'm going to do is just to show that these things haven't come out of a vacuum. They are a part of a continuum of governments attempting to implement their policy, mainly through procurement and through some statutory provisions as well. But policy through procurement is going to be a theme that I'm talking about here today. I'd like to say thanks to my colleagues from University of Salford and from ACLAF and RLB. We've been doing some of the subcontract work into the development of the Value Toolkit, and I'm grateful to my colleagues over the last 12 months, but also in putting this presentation together. What I want to do is just show that even for academics, even for policy wonks, the construction sector has been subjected to lots of policy. And this was a slide that I used to try to keep up to date. And for those of you who are familiar with the construction sector, if we go back to Latham and the Constructing the Team, it's John Egan's Rethinking Construction. I'm just going to try and put what's happened recently into that context. But even for people like me with the time, never mind the busy practitioners, once we got to 2017, 2018, there seemed to be even more of an explosion of government reports and new guidance hitting the construction sector. And that was even before the Brexit decision and before Carillion and before the pandemic. So my slide there becomes a bit too difficult to maintain. So I'm going to try to pick up really around with this industrial strategy with a new elected government in 2018 introducing a construction sector deal. Now, to me, this was a big thing. The construction sector never really being recognised for the contribution that it makes to the economy and therefore to the social and environmental outcomes either. But the construction sector deal starts to put construction on the table, and the construction sector deal, the first of many of the deals negotiated between government and representative construction sector, in my view, in this policy landscape, was a very significant document. It says many things, but it put an emphasis on driving government policy all the way through the procurement process. It puts an emphasis not on lowest price, not as cheap as chips, but on, and here's some of the jargon that is introduced, procurement for growth, building smarter commercial relationships between clients and the supply chain. Why? To drive long-term value, not lowest price and so on. To embed procure for value approach in public procurement and through the Infrastructure Project Authority, but also through all government departments. And as we'll see later, into the wider public sector, local government and so on. And to continue to use public sector procurement to drive investment in skills. I picked these quotations out just to show that the theme for the playbook and the toolkit have been coming for quite some time. It is a high level policy trying to use procurement to embed government policies across social, economic and environmental objectives. That was reinforced in 2018 when, and a proper title for a report, Procuring for Value, using procurement to drive the values that government, national, local or policymakers want to deliver. So here we see the beginnings of the focus that comes out in the Construction Playbook and ultimately the Value Toolkit, that it becomes, by the acceptance of government of this Procuring for Value report, it becomes policy, government policy, that value must be captured and demanded as part of the procurement process, not going for lowest price, cheapest chips competition, but to improve the impact of capital programs, their delivery and lifetime performance. All jargon, but we see that coming through again in the playbook and toolkit. And this is, if we can begin to define value in this broader way, then we can honour the original intent of the investment that the public authorities are making, that we can drive the values from the objectives of an investment. People will remember building schools for the future and raising educational attainment. Well, we can get the focus through the procurement process onto raising educational attainment rather than just bricks and mortar. And of course, if you're going to do that, it has to be cascaded through the procurement systems, and the contractual models need to be flexible enough to drive that what it calls evolutionary changes, bringing about change in the sector. And I'm labouring this, but I think it comes through in the Value Toolkit and the playbook later, that we are procuring to improve the sector, we're procuring to change the sector, we're procuring to drive evolutionary change, not just to get the cheapest price for an individual client and individual project. This was flagged again in the National Infrastructure Strategy, which came out late last year, late 2020, report after report after report. The National Infrastructure, which is trying to define the future needs of particularly England, and particular needs for infrastructure, highlighted two other things that were coming. And never mind the procurement decision, the Treasury were looking at bringing about reform to the investment decision in the Treasury Green Book reforms. And it highlighted or flagged up here that what had been called behind the scenes as Project Speed by government was going to culminate in the publication of the Construction Playbook, which did come out. I think it was planned for the 8th of December. I think it came out shortly after that. So the National Infrastructure Strategy is again pointing to the need to use policy, to use procurement to drive towards the outcomes that we need. So as it puts there, to improve the way projects are chosen, procured and delivered. Nothing new under the sun there. So why was this important? My data is slightly out of date here due to the pandemic, but we just begin to understand the national construction sector. And these are the issues that you guys are considering about Cumbria and the particular and peculiarities of how national policies will play out differently in Cumbria. If we just look nationally, and there's an industry of about 117 billion. That's why it's attractive to governments of all colours to try to drive their policy through this. Depending on how we measure the construction industry, excluding professional services and manufacturing and some others, it's 6% of GDP, including professional services, manufacturing, and some other wider based construction activities. Some economists argue this is 11 or 12%. Even at 6% of GDP, construction is bigger than aerospace and bigger than manufacturing. Why is it attractive to the public sector? Well, like all Western modern economies, the public sector procures roughly about a third to a quarter, in the UK, it's about 37%. It's 30 to 40% in most Western countries. So it is a very significant sector. And because it employs between 2 and 3 million people, 300,000 firms, many of which are small to medium-sized enterprises, it's ripe for attention through procurement and policies. Even this week, we're seeing in the news, I think Mark Farmer, who authored the modernise or die report for construction this week is comparing the construction sector to the haulage sector, which is getting more headline news at the moment, and point out, as the stats there do, that construction was the original gig economy, with in 2019 36% being self-employed. So if we're going to bring about change and we're going to bring about improvements in the economic, social and environmental outcomes, it's procurement and changing some of those inherent structural patterns that the government of all colours are interested with. But why isn't it already happening? It's supposed to be, isn't it? It's just, post-Cumbrian, the House of Commons looked at outsourcing and procurement approaches, and still in 2018 we're highlighting this, an aggressive risk transfer and the search for the lowest possible aggressive risk transfer, transferring risks not to those who are best able to take them, but perhaps to the parties who are least able to take them. And the search for the lowest possible price still typifies public and private sector procurement. So that, again, if that's still the case, you can see why we're concerned about these things. I thought this was very significant in the response to the pandemic. Through the Construction Leadership Council, on behalf of the construction sector, was writing to government, but their response just highlighted the lack of resilience in the sector. And this just reminds us some of the features that Emma was referring to before, that SMEs and small contractors are having to respond to. They can't change the game themselves. They need others to change the rules of the game. So there's a reminder there that construction, the largest public companies, the smallest SME, are highly dependent on that free cash flow. And then what followed was a series of appeals to government to have tax holidays, to have holidays from paying for the training levy, and a welcoming of the public procurement note, which you can see that came in, that did encourage the public sector to pay on time and so on. An argument for what seems like a crazy situation to other sectors of the amount of money that's held in retention. So the pandemic highlighted some of those inherent structural issues in the construction sector, which some of the policy even before then was trying to change. Emma referred to Cumbria as being responsive around social value. And I know again in September 20, the procurement policy notes taking account of social value in the award of central government contracts, again emphasising the policy drive and an attempt to build in social, economic and environmental outcomes. The most significant part of this public procurement note was that the original Social Value Act had just required central government departments to consider social value, whereas the public procurement note strengthened that policy, not through legislation, but through this policy document. It strengthened the requirement that central government bodies should evaluate social value in its tenders, not just consider them. Again, I said even before Brexit, things were changing, and this is playing through in the system at the moment with the white paper transforming public procurement. This was the call for evidence was here about what should public procurement look like post-Brexit. And again, you can see here, there's nothing new under the sun. This has been built into the Construction Playbook and Toolkit, that we must use public money. What to do? Not to drive lowest price, but to boost growth and productivity, help communities recover from COVID and tackle climate change. So it's these high-level values that we need to cascade through all our procurement decisions. So I'm really labouring this to set up the playbook, but public procurement is critical in translating those value decisions into the right contracts with the right providers to be able to deliver. These are the procurement decisions, but even more significant for me is that the public bodies who are applying for their funds to be meeting Green Book Treasury requirements. The Green Book has never really precluded social value, but it's now specifically requiring that investment decisions do maximize the delivery of economic, social, and environmental returns. So that investment decision by government, the Green Book, has got some fundamental changes in there. So before the procurement decision, the investment decision is being influenced by these same value drivers. I'm going to highlight this later, but as we move into the development of the playbook and the toolkit, Keith Waller, who was in charge of, from Construction Innovation Hub, who was in charge of developing the toolkit, had surveyed, if you like, all this public policy and said, yes, we can build cheaper, faster and safer. We know we can do that. But really, new procurement should be thinking beyond the project, not just the capital phase. And we need to be procuring for the better economic, social, and environmental outcomes. So the emphasis isn't on cheap, it's on defining value. And if we lose sight of what the original values were, we can't procure for it. So that's where the Construction Playbook comes in. And Construction Playbook builds upon all of that wealth of reports and policy wonkdom, if you like. And it summarises and sets out the key policies for how the government should assess, procure and deliver public works projects and programmes. It's bringing the decision-making up to a higher level of policy, building the policy in through the procurement process. Does this have any teeth? Well, all central government departments and their arm-length bodies are required to comply or explain why they're not complying with the Construction Playbook. Might pick that up in discussion. So the playbook was developed between the construction with input from the Construction Leadership Council and the industry. And again, it's emphasising the high-level government policies to improve building and workplace safety, yes, on-site safety, but also in the light of Grenfell, the procurement processes to ensure that buildings are designed properly in the first place, to build in the government's wider net zero commitments, and again, to promote social value. I'm egging this on because social value is all on designing for zero commitments has always been like an add-on. It's not, it's core policy. So the playbook builds upon those principles of those earlier documents. Again, I just bring in your attention to what those approaches were. They've been explained in the reports I've described here so far. We're going to be concentrating on outcome-based specifications, letting the market come forward with solutions rather than prescribing the solutions, allowing for longer-term contracting across portfolios. Words about frameworks in a moment, actually. Encouraging standardization in design, but also to drive innovation and modern methods of construction. There had already been a presumption in favour of modern methods for public sector projects over certain values, and now there's a requirement to build into the procurement processes encouragement to modern methods. The sustainable win-win contracting arrangements, which most people in the room will be familiar with, and Emma has referred to back to through the NEC contracts. How does it do this? The playbook sets out 12 chapters incorporating 14 different policies. I'm just going to skip through the headings here, but just pick out one or two for comment. As you do skip through the documents, there's, for most people in the room, I think there are about 30 people in the room now, you'll be familiar with most of the concepts and ideas previously. But it does just try to emphasise that government and government departments should be setting commercial pipelines. Chapter 2 really is basic strategic procurement, textbook policy. Understand your market, and your market in central London is going to be different from the market in Cumbria. Before you place your demand into the marketplace, make sure you understand that. Make sure you understand your own internal client capabilities. Move towards portfolios and longer term contracting. Harmonise and rationalise processes, embed BIM, early supply chain involvement. There's nothing new there, is there? Perhaps we might need some help though with outcome-based approach. How do we define value, and how can we cascade our value decisions forward? And more about that in a moment. That's what the Value Toolkit was sought to do. The other best practice, if you like, captured in the chapter is about setting proper key project deliverables and benchmarking. Number 9 has caused some behind in the drafting, caused some discussion. Number 9 talked about delivery model assessments. A lot of people here were talking more that the language might be more procurement models and procurement paths or procurement routes, and that you need to get your procurement path or your procurement route or your delivery model right before you enter the marketplace. Just a slightly different language used by some participants there. Obviously, effective contracting, the way Emma has described. Effective risk allocation. This plays to some of the there's a focus on risk allocation to avoid allocating risks to those who are unable to take them. Proper payment approaches, assessing the economic and financial standing of suppliers, always important, but particularly during the pandemic when this was published, there was fears that there were more suppliers who might have been hiding behind their auditors, and there might have some of them might have been, particularly during the pandemic stages, normal checks might not have been flushing out any issues of concern about financial supply. So that gives you the overall headings within the construction playbook. And then there's guidance, and I'm not sure what the makeup is in the room today. I think there are quite a lot of contracting authorities, and this is what the playbook would require you to do. Look ahead, plan your pipelines, plan with other clients what you're seeking to do. Set strategic policies and plans for achieving net zero. You'll have these anyway, most of you. Look at aggregating your demand, look at adoption of MMC, but they have to be built into your procurement processes. And achieving social value goals, you'll have them, build them into the process rather than just having them as separate documents. And there's guidance there on what the supply chain should do as well. For more guidance on the playbook, do have a look at the background there, the green book, further bid evaluation guidance, construction leadership, procured for value, and I've referred to those. So while all of that, those policies are being driven, I referred at the beginning to the construction sector deal. And the construction sector deal did, through UKRI, the research arm of government, did put some monies out there, and the monies went into a consortia, which became the Construction Innovation Hub, a consortium between BRE, Cambridge, and the Manufacturing Technology Centre. The Construction Innovation Hub received a slug of public money to do a range of things, but in particular, that money was used to develop a value toolkit in parallel with and in support of the construction playbook. It built on work that had been going on in academia and practice over the past 15 to 20 years, and defined value and produced a means to defining value around produced human, social, and financial measures. And it goes on then to determine and help you to, at the very beginning of your procurement decision, to find out what your requirements are and then to carry them through the procurement process. The playbook and value toolkit do talk to each other. Some of the people who were commissioned by government to do the project speed were also designing aspects of the toolkit. And so the Construction Hub Value Toolkit is highlighted in the playbook as being the tool to enable you to deliver. Essentially, it allows you to make these value-based decision-making. I'm going to rest my case in a moment on this simple premise that this is UK government catching up with other governments and other policy areas where we are capturing the value that we want for our built environment and building into the overall procurement processes. So the question is, what do we value? How can we organise our values? That's what the toolkit does. And what are the desired outcomes, and making sure that what happens in the middle is what we actually deliver. So it requires a tight definition at the beginning of the investments about the overall aim to meet a need for an intervention. And then it separates out the different value contexts and allows a translation then from what the high level policy goal all the way through what to the project outcomes are, and requires us to understand the difference between the inputs, the resources used to undertake value adding activities, the outputs, which are the products or the waste products, the value outcome from the change in the state or condition of the capital due to the project activities, and the overall impact. The Value Toolkit then concentrates on 6 different areas. What it tries to do is focus on where those areas of need and where perhaps procurement processes haven't had the help. So it helps to define a value profile. It helps then to translate that into a risk profile through the calculation of a value index. It requires a matching of the delivery model, the procurement model, to that original value profile, and then it requires a translation of that into modern commercial strategies. I'm skipping through this to allow others to speak. I'm going to end there and setting up the other speakers, but just to say there's yet another report expected soon. In February this year, David Mosey, professor at King's College, was commissioned to do a review of frameworks, and that is expected soon. And if you have another one of these events in a couple of months' time, you might have a few more things to consider about how policy is driving procurement. Project 13 is going to be discussed by some others. Project 13 is an ICE initiative from a number of years ago, concentrating on some of these similar aspects. Thank you, Emma.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. I was nodding furiously at almost everything you were saying there. For me,
almost everything.
Well, it's just so much of it that is exactly what we need, and so much common sense. So I think that was really good, and there's a huge amount to take in on all of those things. So to cover it so comprehensively in the short time, I think is excellent.
Thank you very much.
So we have we're lucky enough that in Cumbria Peter's talked about some of the things, and at the end mentioned Project 13, and Project 13 is trying to tackle a lot of the same issues that Construction Playbook and Value Toolkit are trying to tackle, and has a very similar ethos, I think, in the way it's going about it. And we're lucky enough to have James Fennell from Sellafield here today to talk a real example of Project 13 being applied in Cumbria, and share with us how that's going and how it's been applied, and maybe share some lessons that you've learned along the way, James, if that's okay. So over to you from PPP. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. So as Emma said, James Fennell. I'm head of business management within the PPP Intelligent Client here at Sellafield Limited, and just to talk through kind of where we are in the journey that is PPP program and project partners here at Sellafield, and to take away some of the points that Emma has raised earlier around kind of our standing in Cumbria, which is sometimes forgotten, how we're operating at this moment in time, and 2 years in, some of the little bits that we find ourselves in PPP, and how we can take ourselves forward. So we just push on to slide 3, if that's all right. So what we've got is a change in approach. So back in 2015, 2016, I think there was a number of light bulbs going on for Sellafield in terms of how we were delivering major projects. So what we looked through in our mission is that Sellafield was predominantly a reprocessing site. So it was very operations driven. And therefore, a lot of the way that we operated and worked revolved around ensuring operations were delivered day in, day out, and you got that regular run, repeat, and remove. What we kind of then figured really was moving forward that those operations will start to slow down, and what will start to move is more of a care and maintenance kind of operation on site, focused on decommissioning and remediation of the site. So actually, there was a real big step change in the way that Sellafield was operating. To do that, we had quite a large and comprehensive major projects portfolio that would be need to be delivered to achieve that kind of position. And then we took a look at what does that mean in terms of the environment. Actually, that looks at potentially, £7 billion over 20 years of major projects delivery. And when you take a look at that from a national position, it kind of feeds actually, we are a big player in infrastructure delivery. So all your main headlines, your high-speed 2s, your Crossrails, your Terminal 5s at Heathrow's, all those kind of big players that you talk around time and time again, actually we are up there in terms of what our delivery portfolio means. And therefore for Sellafield to change some of the wrongs of the past, we had to think like we were a major infrastructure player. And we actually had to work within that environment and that network. So on to the next slide, what we did was a bit of a root and branch in terms of why we felt we needed. So what was the trigger for our changes? So historically, we delivered major projects via the traditional EPC route. So part of the way through the process, part of the way through the design, we were bringing a new partner to construct and utilize. And good old public procurement, what we do is we challenge them with understanding 3-4 years worth of design in an 8 to 10 week period to get them to fix to a price with a design that was, unknown and not really given the adequate chance to understand, probably inadvertently transfer the risk at the wrong place. And what we find is actually when we came to the end of our EPC delivery models, usually the time had gone out, the cost had gone up, and the relationship wasn't where it started. So if you went through all those learning points, we had lack of learning from one project to the next. We had fragmented procurement strategies, inappropriate transfers, large resources, man marking. So value for money was not where it needed to be. As a result of some of that, we drive adversarial approaches. And what you basically get is rather than run, repeat, and improve, what you got is new after new after new relationships, new arrangements, new approaches that delivered once as a one-off and then disappeared. So we considered that wasn't the way that we're going to deliver the pipeline that we've got. And what we started to do is engage with PPP and develop our PPP model. So as I say, the program and project partners that we have here at Sellafield. So if we can just jump on a couple of slides, please. So the PPP in summary, so what is it? So it's a collaboration of 4 lot contracts that we awarded in May 2019. What that major projects is looking at is the next 20 years of delivery at Sellafield. And it was considered, one of the key enablers to be, or we are considered one of the early adopters of P13 principles. So we're set up with 4 delivery partners. We've got KBR, who are our integration partner. We've got Jacobs, our design and engineering partner. Morgan Sindel, who look after our infrastructure construction builds, and we've got Doosan, who look after our process construction build. And we'll talk around the role of Sellafield Limited. We have obviously a dual aspect. We have the intelligent client, which is where I come in. That is us who do a small scale review, assurance, governance, assure and enable the PPP within the enterprise of Sellafield. And also we've got individuals who actually now transition into and act as a 5th partner to those 4 partners. So actually what they do is they second that experience into PPP organisation. That is us blending our skills and our understanding with the supply chain, whereas historically we would have man-marked them. And actually what you would have got is a combination of the two, watching each other, sense checking each other, probably getting into real tactical conversation about things rather than working collaboratively to deliver. So there's a key principle in terms of how we started to move forward. So what we blend is that each of the lot partners' expertise. We recognise that not one organisation can deliver the best across all the 4 key areas that were, across all the 4 lots. So you couldn't get a partner that could deliver integration to the best in class, design and engineering to the best in class, construction delivery the best in class, process delivery best in class, and you wouldn't get that one size fits all. We wanted the best. So what we went out is we formed the 4 relationships, and then we bring them together alongside ourselves as aligned delivery teams. Again, looking at collaboration and delivery of outcomes. So that partnership then provides us the access and the expertise, both locally and longer term, in terms of what we need to deliver the 7 business case benefits, which I'll come on to next. The PPP model and the Project 13 model, as you can see, there are strong similarities in what they look like and where they are. So the P13 model talks around having an intelligent owner. So that person understands the delivery and the drive of the organization, the approach that needs to be taken and how you deliver to the outcomes. It recognizes that the owner will always have key suppliers and key advisors that sit alongside an integrator organization, who in our language is PPP, to drive that value outcome through the organization. And then you talk about the supply chain and advisors, that flow of information down and that long-term relationship. So in the PPP model, we have HMG and NDA, the investor. So we make our business case up to them. We're talking to ourselves as Sellafield Limited, and you've got the enterprise as Sellafield Limited. You've got the intelligent client that acts as the funnel between the Sellafield organisation of 10,000 strong, the PPP organisation of circa 1,000 kind of delivery people across the 4 partners and their supply chain at this moment in time, to ensure that we've got clarity and consistency in the way that we build the relationship and the understanding that we drive to. And then we've got beneath the PPP, their supply chain partners. What do? We look at profit for performance. So we recognise that to drive a different dynamic, not all profit should be at risk. So we have different approaches to profit. We have small nominal profit, which looks to recognise that profit is earned and is not a dirty word. But what we do is we start to drive towards bigger scale profits on the delivery of an outcome to Sellafield. So where Sellafield receives the benefit, the partners receive the benefit, as opposed to a gradual kind of earning of benefit when the owner doesn't get anything at that moment in time. So it's a shift in the way that we drive incentivization. We've got the long term, so we drive away from short-termism, short-term decision making, one-off decision making, into what is best value over the pipeline. Take projects from, apologies for the Sellafield acronym, IPDG. So that's when we initiate a project across to the full point of project completion. We have sustainable profits, as we've described, and we have a culture around collaboration. So it's not about one person, one conversation, one incentivization model. It's about program delivery across the portfolio that drives us all working together across all the key areas of focus that we have at this moment in time to get to a consistent outcome on behalf of all parties. If you talk onto slide 8, as we discussed, the 5 critical success factors we developed in delivery of PPP was cost management. It's a learning from the past that our cost management hasn't always been where it needs to be. So we do need a sharp focus on it. But I'll talk about, the way that we drive that cost management from the early kind of adoption of P13 principles and that alignment with the Construction Playbook. We do so via should cost and benchmarking. So when we drive the project delivery piece, we use a combination of should cost and benchmark rather than tender returns, as we've always done. So we've looked to raise the bar in the way that we drive those 4 processes. We look at employment. So that's the longevity of the relationship allows the opportunity to invest rather than short-termism, which drives I need to look after myself in this one-off arrangement. We look at the outcome. So as I say, it's the match between we get an outcome that we can then use to deliver our mission on site. The partners get their outcome, which is the reasonable amount of reward and recognition for the delivery. The output, the definition of early contractor involvement. So it's really trying to work through actually bringing the supply chain in earlier to bring about standardization, to bring about repeatability, to actually drive to an outcome focus rather than a technical focus, which I think everyone who's experienced Sellafield in the past will know we're renowned for. So how we actually start to drive and a shift in the Sellafield culture and create the opportunity for PPP to do that on our behalf. And then the workforce skills. So again, that longevity of employment, allowing our partners and their supply chains to actually look through the length of the relationships and build for the future of what for Sellafield is a long-term infrastructure delivery program. On slide 9. So what does that mean? As I say, Sellafield personnel are assigned to the lot partners. So we're not a man-marking organisation anymore. We are very much in with the supply chain delivering. A shift in the way that we collaborate with the supply chain. We take on the responsibility of delivering for the lot partners. It's a shift for the way that we've been employed and we've worked previously. Drives a different mentality within the collective organisations. that porosity then of personnel actually allows the lot partners to truly understand the working environment they're operating in at this moment in time as well. Historically, what you get is a misunderstanding between the way that we work, the way that the supply chain works. That causes friction, that drives adversarial approaches. The combination of the two working together to deliver drives collaboration, improves the understanding, improves the recognition, should drive forward an improved relationship, which brings about successful outcomes. And the benefits of the model that we'd look to get from delivering in this way and leveraging our pipeline in the way that we've got, if we just flick on to the next slide, is increased value for the money for the UK taxpayer. It's new opportunities for Sellafield Limited and its people. It's accelerated high hazard reduction, enhanced employment opportunities for our people in Sellafield. It's very much about improved predictability of project cost and schedule outturn. And it's looking at enhanced reputation and recognition for Sellafield, its employees, its supply chain, across various stakeholders that have looked at Sellafield in the past and wondered what is going on when you deliver major projects. We just talk around a bit of the forward look then, and again, the conversations of how that operates. So our project pipeline, as I've described, is quite large. We describe our projects as typically capital value of over 50 million, large kind of standalone arrangements, limited interaction with existing operational and highly complex, i.e. large scale projects. But this approach is not something that you just focus on the big scale. The scale is appropriate to the size of your organization. Big is big to different people, different organizations, and a shift in terms of the way that you build these relationships absolutely is biased by the approach that you have and your delivery portfolio. So don't take it as just because we at PPP and Sellafield have quite a large major project that this is for us and for us only. Absolutely, those parameters and expectations drive through every organization that you will work with. So our pipeline is large. As you can see from the next page, then it's large and it's consistently large over a period of time. So you've got a large scale of delivery through our current pipeline. It's also recognizing the pipelines change, and we will undergo significant change through 2039, up to 2039 when the contract concludes. And again, when you talk around change and how you manage change, relationship gets you 98% of the way. There will always be that contract recognition and kind of preemptive views and how you manage your procure and contract, manage your contract comes into it. But 98% of that comes from the way that actually your relationship is operating. It's people that will deliver these projects, not just a contract management organization, a procurement organization. Again, a drive to collaboration. Our supply chain strategy then is changing the way that we look to operate with PPP through the supply chain. So I've talked around £7 billion. So I just flick on to the next slide, please. Talked around £7 billion over 20 years, leveraging the pipeline of what we've got. That's with our 4 lot partners. And what we've also got then is an expectation that will flow into our supply chain. So when you talk through PPP, you talk around P13, you talk around an ecosystem. The ecosystem does not stop with the integrator or your integration partners. It flows all the way through your levels of supply chain organizations that support you. And we recognize that in PPP. We recognize that probably modeled 60 to 70% of our spend will be delivered through the PPP supply chain, not with the PPP partners. So there's a significant expectation of how that will flow down. And we've got an intent around a delivery model of multi-project procurements. So again, learning from the one-offs, that the one-offs don't work. Learning from the fact that bringing people in earlier allows them to bring about the standardization, the opportunity, the early supply chain engagement. So we talk around key delivery partners and the strategy, which is soon to be released, looks to talk around how we flow through that kind of process and how that operates. Consistency with the PPP model. So absolute alignment. We're not looking to get different working relationships through ourselves into PPP and then something different down into the supply chain. What we do recognize, however, is that it's not always as simple as one size fits all. Different industries and different sectors work in different ways and have different relationships, different experiences, and we've got to respect that in the way that we operate. You cannot force change on people. Change is a two-way thing. Comes about with collaboration, and you've got to recognize where you're pushing people into an area they're not comfortable, and actually work within that environment, and not just think that everyone can move in the same pace that you work in. And therefore, a bit of an ask for me, start to engage with the PPP. I've noticed Mr. Rossiter is on the line. He's part of our delivery team, and he's central to some of these delivery approaches that we're looking to drive within PPP. And John is a very useful contact to start to engage as to how the business is and how your business is for where there's aspects of that can deliver in such an environment, alongside our key kind of principles of early contractor involvement, innovation, collaboration, etc. I won't read out the slides. And we also recognise sustainability. Says sustainability not an add-on to the PPP mission. It's something that we've looked to embrace. Flicking onto the final couple of slides. So it's something that we've looked to embrace, and to the degree that we've actually built our own sustainability framework. So that's talking around actually how we want to take on the challenge, which is the PPN around sustainability, and how we want to flow that through everything we do within PPP. So it's a recognition, again, of a long-term relationship that creates enduring capability. And it talks around the fact that partners are fully bought into this approach. They recognise that what this brings is opportunity for them to further develop their reputation, their understanding, which ultimately will bring about future rewards because they've done it before, and they can sell a story that is they've done it before and they've worked together with someone before. The last picture is what we call a messy picture. But what that's determined to do is just drive in one page all the series of outcomes that we're looking to get from PPP. It talks around the environment that we work within, both at Sellafield and wider within government and industry. And it looks at the outcomes that we're looking to achieve from what we do here. And it's always a good kind of, when you're talking around driving an outcome and developing an outcome at the start, it's a very good way on through a series of pictures of finding something, recognizing something, and challenging back to say, are you still delivering to what you wanted to achieve at the start? Emma just mentioned a couple of bits there around how we've got on over the first 2 years. As everyone says, 2 years in, has it been easy? No. Did we expect it would be? No. If we did, it wouldn't be something that we've put 20 years and committed 20 years to. Building those relationships, changing those cultures, changing the way that we operate from a Sellafield site that's been going on for a while and operated in a way for a while. It works through a series of factors and a series of change mechanisms. We've brought about 4 partners together through our procurement exercise. They have to take a bit of time to get to know each other. So collectively, there's been a whole lot of scene setting, but we've had massive success in those first 2 years. We've set baselines for 2 projects at circa £1.7 billion. That's through should cost modelling. That is through benchmarking and understanding. That is massively different to the way that we've operated in the past. That has been recognised by HMG by the fact they approved the first one. The second one is going through the approval process now. But again, the engagement, the alignment, the understanding of what we're doing is proven that success is coming. We've got to follow that up with delivery now, and that'll be where the proof comes in. But right now, a lot of learning has gone in, and a lot of change is coming with how we're operating within PPP. I think that's me.
That was great. Thanks, James. I like that. I think you're totally right in that the elements around the people, and it is people that are delivering it, not organisations, and thinking about it almost in change management and behavioural change is essential. You've got a couple of questions coming through on the chat. I'll just read the first one out. So the first one says, how has this changed safety and operational culture so far? And has this shown efficiencies which it hopes to achieve, such as carbon reduction, cost savings and safer delivery? So you touched on some of those a little bit at the end, but I don't know if you want to add a little bit in response to that question.
Yeah, I think, again, within 2 years of PPP, what you've seen is actually we added in-flight projects into PPP. So there's a very clear recognition of the in-flight projects. They've already gone a certain way down the road. And actually about some of the early stage PPP performance is about maintaining the pathway as opposed to showing significant improvements to the pathway. Obviously at Sellafield, we are highly safety focused. So what, you know, the success that you see today is actually that change in arrangement hasn't seen any detriment to safety performance. So we have maintained that position, the work that we're doing, and now that we've got kind of past an early stage of understand where we need to go, understand our relationships, now we're putting in place the strategies that drive an improvement in all those areas. So it hasn't shown immediate performance, but we never expected it would. So again, in management, the expectations of our stakeholders, we always viewed this as a 3 to 5 year window before we actually started to receive the benefits, the initial benefits from PPP. So anything before that was a bonus. So now, as I say, the time is actually starting to come to say, right, we're going to change the way that we're delivering.
I know I've worked on the ISA for a while myself, so I think you're right in that trying to improve safety in probably one of the safest environments there already is would be a challenge. There's only so. You have another question that says, is the PPP model underpinned through lean thinking and lean construction techniques to deliver the value defined and required in all of the historic reports and the more recent reports? Lean will provide the real foundations to achieve it. Do the panel feel the industry has recognised and embraced this? And if so, it says, if so, why not? I guess it means if not, why not? We seem to continually write reports and rebadge strategies rather than really drive to embed lean thinking. Does this add to the issues of adoption, embedment, and the required improvement?
It's quite a lot to unpick on that.
Yeah.
I think from just a kind of broad alignment kind of piece, that's why outcome focused arrangements are so critical. When you're in an environment like we have been in Sellafield, where you are highly regulated, your technical specifications and the way that you put stuff out ultimately means that actually you drive your supply chain and the partners to operating in one way, which is delivery to a technical specification. Outcomes enable the supply chain to actually get involved in developing these lean techniques and driving that improvement back into our business. So rather than the client being the lead, which we've tried to do, but recognize is probably a weakness on our part because we don't do it day in, day out. We're driving that now into the supply chain, and those that do it day in, day out, those who understand lean principles in construction within their trade pack, within their specific discipline, much better than we ever will. And we've given them the opportunity now to actually come back to us and say, right, you've got an outcome. This is the best way to deliver this outcome. This will be via standardization, lean approach to construction, modular build, and all that kind of good stuff. So again, are we there now? No, because we were so far down the line with some of our major projects. Is it an expectation of the way that we're going to deliver business in the future? Absolutely. And we'd look to, again, see those benefits over the next 2 to 3 years as our newly formed projects start to come online and start to get built to those kind of outcomes.
Peter, do you want to say something on lean as well?
Yeah, just one small point to James's excellent answer there. The question has come from Andy Spoon, who's a lean specialist. So I think, Andy, this just opens up the opportunity for the contractors and subcontractors, as James has said, to use those lean tools and specialisms that you're an advocate of. So I think it's more power to the supply chain's elbow and therefore yours.
And for me, I do think there are similarities between this and lean. A lot of it is around lean construction. One of the kind of core tools that we would use for that would be the collaborative planning workshop early on at the start of a meeting, which is around getting all the parties around a table and really beginning to identify, where are your bottlenecks and where have you got wasted time and where can we work on the program together. And I think the principles in Construction Playbook and Project 13 around valuing the different things that people bring to the table are very similar to the type of behaviours that you should get in a proper lean approach to lean. And I think another part of lean that I love and that I think is required for this collaborative and this type of approach is also this, lean often I think is misunderstood. And in my view, it's more around empowering and enabling people to kind of own issues and to have the kind of be empowered to go and fix them and to make those improvements continually, and it not be a top-down approach, but it be something that people are really engaged in. And I think the type of collaborative behaviours that are trying to be enabled to happen by these sort of approaches do just that. They try to make sure that the people who know best and who are at the actual position to make a difference have the autonomy and permission and support to make those changes and improvements. And I think Andy's saying, lean thinking considered value through life cycle starts with understanding customer value and how all can deliver it. It works with people, not just process. I totally agree. I think it's doing a lot of the same things. And I do kind of share a little bit it can sometimes feel like we're rewriting the stuff that we've already written before, like we've tried to do this before, but I think maybe that's just a necessary part of change, and hopefully every iteration has a slightly better understanding and gets us closer to actually getting it right. The only other thing I wanted to add just on lean is that there is a lean forum in Cumbria, which Salford is involved in, and which lots of the local manufacturers involved in. And they do really good quality events. We're involved as Story, so even though we're a contractor, we still get involved in the local lean forum. And if other people were interested, I would encourage you to get involved. It's a very good group, and they host really good quality events around lean. It's just a shout out for Andy's saying too many consider lean a suite of tools. We need to understand it's more than that. Thanks for fielding my questions. I totally agree. It's not about tools, it's about people. It's a philosophy almost more than the tools. I love lean. I could talk about lean all day. Shall we go on though? I think unless there's any more questions for either Peter or James, I can't see any more in the chat. Then I will assume we can move on to another James Daplan from Cumbria County Council. Thanks.
Great, thanks Emma. Hi everybody. Brilliant. Let's just move on. So I'm James Daplan. I'm the Capital Programme Control Manager at Cumbria County Council. I work within the Capital Programme team, of which there's about 40, 50 of us, mainly delivering highways and property infrastructure projects. I mean, look, the presentation today was really badged at the beginning as a client's view on the construction playbook. So if we just move on a slide, what I'm going to talk about is introducing Cumbria County Council and our services. I'm going to introduce our capital programme and our spend and what we look like. I think as you've seen today, the playbook covers a lot of elements, covers a lot of principles, and to focus on each and every one in a short webinar would take too long. So what I'm going to do is focus on three core elements of the playbook: collaboration, focus on outcomes, and building back greener and net zero, that frankly we're really interested in at Cumbria County Council. But I think it's also worth saying, as Peter and Emma have been talking about today, that the playbook's another document in a suite of documents, and we tend to get another one sort of each and every year. And what we've not yet done at Cumbria County Council is embedded it within all of our processes, but hopefully what I can do through today's presentation to give you a flavour of where we hope to go in the future, using some of those principles, whether they're new or whether they're regurgitated from previous policy. So let's get going. Next slide, cheers. Great. So for those of you who don't know, and it's come across a bit weird, hasn't it? Let's hope the rest of the presentation doesn't look like that. Cumbria County Council is currently responsible for strategic local services in Cumbria, or some of the strategic local services in Cumbria. We have a large portfolio covering property and highways. What you can see there, most but not all of our infrastructure projects that we work on will usually be in sort of the property realm or the highways realm, and I'll come on to that a bit later. On the property side of things, the buildings and our spaces have long been central, core to how we deliver lots of our services. And I wouldn't have thought that the pandemic that we've just been through is going to change that massively, especially when we look at some of our assets like schools and care homes. They're not going anywhere, are they? And they're going to need to be maintained and improved moving forward. As you can see from the list, we have a large number of assets, a lot of which are schools, care homes, our own offices, our Cumbria Fire and Rescue, and we do a lot of work on them every year. I'll come onto some stats in a minute. Next slide. Perfect. We also have a huge highway estate, and we're doing a lot of work on our highway estate at the moment. I'm not going to run through the list of stats, but if you pieced it all together and laid it in a line, it'd be something like Land's End to John O'Groats 9 times that the council has to look after and maintain and improve each and every year. So we're talking about a significant asset there. It means a lot of surfacing, a lot of drainage, lines, gullies, and such like. It also makes it extremely susceptible to external threats. Flooding, poor winters really can have an impact on our highway estate, and it's why that we see a lot of our spend going into that asset, both in past years and into the future. Okay, next slide. So in order to deliver our services, the council, as Peter mentioned earlier, has a capital programme of works. We call it our capital programme, but the programme is effectively a subset of major programmes and major projects, each stretching to millions of pounds in their own right over a number of years usually. And it's worth remembering that these programmes and projects are driven to enable the council to deliver our plan to meet our own outcomes for the people of Cumbria. And if we look on the next slide, I'll just remind everybody that we do have a set of outcomes outlined in our plan, which are that people in Cumbria are healthy and safe, that places in Cumbria are well connected and thriving, and that the economy in Cumbria is growing and benefits everyone. And that should and does underpin any project and any program and any portfolio that we deliver on. I've also put an interesting slide next to that, which basically shows our annual spend. Oh, sorry, if you just nip back one, that's great. Our annual spend as the council each year, and that's made up of as most of you know, made up of a mixture of council tax, business rates, and grants that we manage to secure from the government. But I'll come on to spend on the next slide. So in general, we spend around about 100 to 120 million pounds every year, which I know in the Sellafield world seems a little bit small, doesn't it? But it's a large amount of money to the county council. And if you were in the council 10 years ago, I mean, it's increased probably tenfold. And so we're extremely proud of it. We use both in-house teams and an extremely wide range of external suppliers to deliver the capital programme each and every year, which is always a challenge. We generally do it through 16 major frameworks that we operate. I'll talk about them a bit more in a second, and 16 major term contracts that we run concurrently over time and refresh. We also have within those frameworks something around 150 bespoke call-off contracts that we'll administer each year to deliver bespoke projects. But they can be anything from £5,000 to 15 million with a couple of projects that are much bigger than that. Just you'll see the fluctuating budget in the middle there over the years from 2015 for the next sort of 4 years, and the explanation for that is really that we were flooded in 2015 and had an injection of around about 120 million pounds into the council to react to Storm Desmond, and that's why there seems to be some outliers in those years, but generally between 100 and 120 million pounds spend. Okay, next slide. And here's what it looks like in the next 5 years. And when you total all of those amounts together, in the next 5 years, it looks like we'll be approaching £500 million worth of spend, which is a really significant figure for Cumbria County Council and our supply chain to get involved with. And perhaps if you look at the graph, the interesting bit is that a lot of that will be in and around our highways estate and major road projects like one at Griesbeck, like another one at Bothwell, and our Carlisle Southern Link Road project will make up a big chunk of that spend. But when you look at the slide earlier about our highways estate, that chunk of spend starts to make sense. Not to say that there aren't substantial amounts of spend in other areas of our estate and our services. Okay, we'll move on. So getting to get into the critical bit of the presentation. What I've given a basic introduction to the capital program, and I suppose the question is how do we, acting as clients, believe the playbook is going to impact on our delivery? And I'm going to cover three themes: collaboration, a focus on outcomes, and building back greener and net zero. And hopefully I'll get into a bit of detail here. And try and give you some real world examples of what this actually means on the ground. It's really difficult sometimes to turn a lot of the policy that we've heard about today into what we're actually going to do on the ground. And I'll try and give you some examples to show how we can and have done it in the past. I'll be presenting each of the three themes in a sort of what we do now, and then what we could do next, and then just giving you a bit of a case study about how that might have worked, just to exemplify how we might have succeeded in the past. Okay, let's go on to the first one. So collaboration. Okay, so collaboration is a core theme in the playbook, and we've said it a lot today, and it's the theme of the webinar at the moment. It's not necessarily new, is it? I'm pretty sure it was called partnership a few years ago, and I'm pretty sure it's been called other things in previous years, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that every few years the government are going to produce a piece of policy that's gonna reaffirm the direction that we should be going in, and to reassure contracting authorities like ourselves that we are taking the right steps in the right direction by continuing down the collaboration route. Why wouldn't we? It would be bonkers not to, wouldn't it? What do we do now? Well, interesting on, Peter's going to perhaps elaborate next time round on framework approach, but we do take a long-term framework approach. So most of our frameworks are 4 years or 3 years with options to extend plus one again, perhaps. And a lot of our assessments are highly based on quality, and quality can cover all manner of things, but we are talking about social value. We are talking about the environment when we're talking about that. So we're already doing good things with our frameworks there. We use the NEC 3 suite of contracts daily, and over the past 4 or 5 years, we've been rolling them out through our internal staff resources and our external supply chain, so that pretty much all of our major contracts are now managed under NEC 3 and that collaborative environment that brings. We actively engage with the supply chain. We have supplier events, and many people on the call will have been to those in the past and enjoyed them. And we really try to provide as much information as possible to our supply chain to enable them to engage with us. We have some limited, perhaps, use of early contractor involvement. And we do design and build contracts, which brings our supply chain into our projects early. But could we do better? Yep, we absolutely could. And we'll see how perhaps on the next slide. So if we move along. So what can we do? What does the playbook help us to do next to improve our collaboration? Well, those of you that have read the playbook, it encourages even earlier contractor involvement, doesn't it? And this might raise a few eyebrows on the call that we say, right, well, let's bring our supply chain in pre-business case, perhaps before we traditionally have. And we can see real benefits of doing that at Cumbria County Council, particularly around the cost and the buildability of our designs that we can get into trouble about, can't we? If we don't have a solid design that is workable once we get into our delivery mode. So yeah, we can absolutely see that could happen. We will probably, and where appropriate, continue to use our design and build contracts. They do work. They do bring in contractors earlier into our projects than perhaps a traditional design, and then bring our supply chain in to build some of our assets. Is design and build always perfect? It's absolutely not, is it? But hopefully we can continue down that vein, and certainly our supply chain are really starting to work with us within those environments. We're going to make a switch to NEC 4. That's no surprise, is it? Most of the industry is going to do that. And what does that mean? It's a bit more collaborative. it starts to share risk out a bit more fairly, doesn't it? But it also has targeted ECI clauses where we can bring in the supply chain earlier and more easily into our contracts, which was a bit tricky before, and we had to use bespoke clauses to do so, didn't we? So hopefully a rollout to NEC4 on most of our major contracts within the next 2-3 years once our frameworks end and we refresh them. And we've got to continue to encourage SMEs into our supply chain. We don't do this. We do it well. We don't do it anywhere near as well as we should do. And we really need our direct supply chain and the supply chain that supports some of our larger contractors to be getting some of this stuff and to be working with us. Okay, just as a bit of a case study about how that might look in the future, and this will be familiar to some of you, if we go on to the next slide. We've run our infrastructure recovery program in response to Storm Desmond over the last 5-6 years. And I think anybody that worked on that program, both through the emergency recovery and through the longer program of recovery works, will realize that fast mobilization of projects was absolutely essential right from the beginning. And what we saw on those projects was the supply chain coming together with the county council and our experts in-house right from the offset, and getting together through collaboration meetings, site meetings and such like, and really focusing on our outcomes. And we'll come on to outcomes in a second. But what we saw through that program was that there is real benefit in bringing expertise around the table early on. Yes, the project's got to be right, but in this circumstance, it gives us an example of how we can do it in the future. And just the third point there, that we really tried to focus on the knowledge of the supply chain to meet the outcomes, using almost performance requirement. This bridge has fallen over, we need to rebuild it approach, as opposed to this is the technical specification for what we want that bridge to look like in the future, please do it our way. And we'll come on to that more in the outcome based approach, but we know we can do it. Yes, it was a well-funded program, and we had the ability to move quickly in an emergency situation, but we can certainly learn lessons from that program to roll out to other projects. Okay, next slide. Perfect. So the second element, principle, if you like, of the playbook I want to focus on, I'm sorry that this is a bit of a boring slide with no picture, is focus on outcomes. So what do we do at the moment? Well, we usually, let's face it, and we can't really hide from this, we use a traditional contracting authority, and we use a traditional contracting authority approach, don't we? And we've certainly could do better in that space. We control our procurement usually through fixed stages, usually aligned to the Office for Governmental Commerce stages, and there's probably good reason for that. And there's probably a couple. One being that it's tried and tested within the county council. We've successfully delivered projects like that before, and perhaps that's a mindset to get out of. Let me check my notes. I'll move on to the next one. We do have some resilience on traditional feasibility, planning, design, and build procurement routes. So we generally, in our heads, try and split them up. And they're usually aligned to sort of the REBA stages or the Highways England stages, aren't they? And perhaps, that makes our delivery models quite clunky. It also gives us some element of control. Just coming back onto the second bullet point, the reason why we perhaps, are a bit clunky is that we are a public sector organisation, and we do have financial controls in place and such like that we have to adhere to, and perhaps the approach that we take is often safe when we are coming from a public sector point of view. Okay, so that's what we do now, but what could we do in the future? So next slide, please. Great. So we can improve our supplier shared ownership of our council outcomes, and you saw them on the slide earlier, but also our project and program outcomes, the ones that are specific to the works that we're doing. And we already have that with some real core members of our supply chain. And we know, lots of them are based in and around Cumbria and are naturally going to share our objectives, but we can always build on that. We can shift where appropriate towards outcome-based specifications rather than detailed technical specifications or detailed scope. But we've got to be a bit careful, and we've got to pick our projects. We don't necessarily want to be reinventing the wheel where we know what we want to do, where it's repeat work. So we need to pick our projects when we do that. We definitely need to allow space for innovation to meet our outcomes using less traditional construction techniques. If we don't do that, then we're just going to end up going down the same path that we've trodden before. Okay. And we really, as a council, and we're very honest about this, need to develop our intelligence around project should cost. Okay, and that means creating ourselves a baseline from previous programs and projects that will give us something to guide our future future project developments. Now, how we're supposed to do that in a current situation in a pandemic, where perhaps overnight sometimes prices have risen by 20% in some of our supply chain, it is going to be a real challenge, and we haven't really touched about on that today, have we? So creating that model where we think we know how much it should cost at the moment could be trickier than we think. Okay. Just as a case study, a focus on outcomes, we can do this. We have done this. And here's a case study about our Penrith Road flood alleviation scheme. So we know we knew that 118 properties were at risk down at Penrith Road, and we chose to take quite a light touch approach to this when we tendered the project, and we basically said we need 118 properties protected. We think that's going to entail building a flood basin that is this side, and we think we need a set of pumps this size to accompany that, and that was pretty much it. We delivered it through an NEC Option C contract, which again improves collaboration, and we delivered the project within the project funding window. Now, I suppose there's a couple of health warnings that come with that from a county council point of view, in that it's very administrative heavy. It takes a lot of time to manage that contract from a client's point of view, and that's something we definitely need to consider and work on in the future. But it's definitely an example of how we've trusted our supply chain to understand our requirements and understand our overall outcome objective to protect homes from flooding and deliver a project that's fit for purpose. Okay, let's move on to the last one. Look, building greener and towards net zero, it's a cross-cutting theme in the playbook, isn't it? And this is only going to become a bigger issue in the industry. We've got COP26 in Scotland next month, and it's going to be a big deal. And over the next 4 or 5 years in particular, as we try to race towards our net zero targets, everybody's going to be talking about building greener and getting towards net zero more and more. So what do we do as Cumbria County Council? Well, we're not necessarily the good guys in this story at the moment, are we? And I suppose, as members of the supply chain who deliver construction for us, you're with us on that. We deliver millions of pounds worth of construction projects every year, many using traditional techniques. We generally, both within the council and I suspect in our supply chain, have an aging and fossil fuel based fleet of plant and machinery to undertake those works, which we know we're going to have to phase out in the future. And to go alongside that, we have an aging corporate estate and schools estate at the county council, where frankly it's a challenge every year to keep it safe, wind and watertight. And this presents us with an enormous challenge, both in terms of funding and how we drive down towards net zero. but let's be optimistic and say what can we do about this? Well, if we go on to the next slide. We have a carbon management strategy at the County Council, and we're working really hard at the moment, as Peter touched on earlier, to embed that within our policies and then into our frameworks and then into our works on the ground. So those of you that work with us on a regular basis are going to start to see some changes in the way that we let projects and frameworks in the future, because it's really going to have to focus on driving our emissions down. We're already working on some bespoke projects to pioneer green materials. And if you remember, we do a lot with our highways, don't we? So projects like our plastic roads trial that we're working on with the government, and we're working with Shell on warm lay asphalt, and our LED rollout program are really pushing the boundaries of what we can do and what we're going to have to do as an authority to drive us towards net zero. And we need our supply chain to come with us on that. And again, we need to allow space for this for us to try with our supply chain and fail, because we're not going to get everything right, and to learn from that and to return those lessons back into the capital program so that we can move forward. And just as an example, and to try and find a bit of positivity here, if we move on to the next slide, our streetlight program's been rolled out. It's around about £12.5 million over 7 years. And we've got it to a point now, and just do take a look at the graph, because it's an amazing achievement where they're saving 9,000 tons of total carbon dioxide emissions annually. Now that doesn't necessarily mean a lot to anybody, but if I put that into some context, you saw the facts and the figures around our corporate estate and schools earlier. We would think that our emissions from our corporate estate, all of those buildings and all of those schools, would probably be about 9,000 tons each year. So the saving that we've made is extremely large and equivalent to perhaps the carbon emissions of a very large business operating as a standalone. And maybe that provides us a glimmer of hope that technology can deliver huge carbon savings if we allow it to develop. And I just think that's a wonderful example and worth sharing with you to give everyone a bit of positivity at the end of the session. Just some conclusions. Next slide. So from a client's perspective, the playbook's going to have a role. Do we understand it all yet? No, but I've given you the core thoughts on where we want to go. We're going to need to tailor that playbook, and it even says in the playbook you're going to need to tailor it to your organisation for our programme and our supply chains. It will take time to build those relationships to deliver some of the ambitions, including that outcome-based approach, and we're going to need to develop trust. And that move towards net zero is going to become more central over the next couple of decades, and we're going to have to keep talking about it. I think I'll leave it there. If we take the presentation down and we'll have questions, we'll leave it there. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks for that, James. So we're kind of out of time. There are a couple of questions for you, James, but I don't think we're going to have time to cover all of them. Some of them are from Peter, and there's some interesting discussion around how maybe in an emergency it almost encourages better behaviour, and certainly that was our experience. I often use the emergency Pooley Bridge as an example of just beautiful collaboration, because we all just wanted that bridge open and everyone worked together. We don't have time, I don't think, to get into those really, because I don't want to run over. I think one of the questions is around how could SMEs go about engaging with the county council and framework. I think that one is probably important enough that maybe we send a response out to the participants, because I think, you know, it's a great question and I don't want to ignore that one. Yeah. Jim, maybe between us.
And just to hit it head on, Emma, if we share the contact details, any SMEs can contact me directly, and we'll make sure that you get in touch with exactly the right people at the county council.
Great, thank you. I think it was too much of an important one for me to ignore. Whereas, apologies, Peter, I don't think we've got time to get into your questions, even though they are great ones. The slides will be available. I think it's been recorded as well. I think the recording might also be available. Jen can probably set me right on that. So I think probably all that's left to say in the 0 minutes I have left is just thank you for the people that attended and signed up and came today. I hope you've got as much out of it as I have, but thank you to the speakers as well. I think it was excellent. Like, there's a clear opportunity and clear improvements, and I'm excited at all the possibilities that this change in approach brings the industry and our county. So no, thank you. It was great.
Thanks, Emma.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Emma. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye for now.